Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching. Captain, Ensign Carter said from comms, eyes locked on his display. I'm picking up something strange, not on any open channel. Nolan straightened in the command chair. Source? Keys clattered under Carter's touch, console light glinting in his narrowed eyes as the cadence sharpened. The bridge fell silent, while a garbled, rhythmic pattern spilled from the speakers, sharp, almost musical, nothing like human encryption. Closed alien frequency, Carter reported. Not meant for us, but it's strong, very close. Routine was the heartbeat of the edge, patrols slipping into the black, comm relays sweeping the void, the slow spin of the station keeping everyone in rhythm, which was why a signal like this was disturbing. Put it through, Nolan ordered. The voice that filled the bridge was deep, layered with static and alien sibilance, but the urgency cut through the distortion. The translation software hesitated for a beat before overlaying the words in human speech. This is Fleetmaster Voran of the Luthari Refuge. Our convoy is under attack. Millions of civilians aboard. Request immediate assistance at coordinates. The name repeated, as if the sender feared the message might fall into the wrong hands. Coordinates scrolled across the displays, less than half a day's jump from the edge. The distress call ended abruptly, replaced by a background hum of interference. Nolan's jaw tightened. The Luthari. He'd seen their profiles before, tall, willowy beings with translucent glass-like skin and eyes that shimmered like oil on water. Not a warlike species. They relied on others for defense. Others were anywhere near. He looked to Lieutenant Capri at sensors. Any sign of Allied fleets in that sector? Capri's fingers tapped quickly, the results flashing in red across her station. Negative. No friendlies, no neutral patrols, nothing but scattered debris fields from old engagements. Nolan leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing. Run a deep sweep, full power to long-range scanners. I want to be certain. The Edge's sensor arrays extended their reach, pulling in faint traces from light years away. On the main screen, the starfield rippled with overlays of sensor data. Still nothing. No incoming jump signatures, no defense fleet. They're on their own, Capri confirmed, her voice grim. Nolan's mind was already racing. Protocol demanded they report up the chain. Any deployment beyond the assigned patrol zone needed approval, but protocol also meant time, and time was what the Luthari didn't have. He activated the long-range comms. Admiral Ordonez, this is Captain Nolan, the Edge. We've intercepted a coded Luthari distress call. Coordinates uploaded. No defensive fleets in sight. Requesting immediate orders to intervene. The transmission vanished into the dark, a beam of compressed data aimed toward an Admiralty office dozens of light years away. And then came the wait. On the bridge, the hum of the station felt heavier. The crew returned to their work, but every pair of ears tilted toward Carter's console. Minutes crawled past. Out here, messages could take hours to return, if interference from the nearby Oros binary didn't garble them entirely. Then Carter's console flared again. Another signal, same source, same encryption. Let's hear it. The voice was raw now, its smooth alien cadence shattered by strain. We've lost 2 ships, thousands dead. More will follow. If anyone hears this, please. If no one responds, we will lose them all. Silence hung for a heartbeat, punctuated only by the soft crackle of background static. On the main screen, Nolan's face was reflected faintly in the starlight, his expression tightening like a steel cable under load. Prep the fleet, he said, voice low but carrying to every corner of the bridge. Commander Briggs, the XO, turned toward him sharply. Sir, we haven't received... We're going, Nolan cut in, eyes still locked on the coordinates hovering in the air between them. Carter hesitated at his console. Captain, they weren't even calling for us. That message was, they're dying. Nolan said flatly. That's all that matters. Briggs gave a curt nod, turning toward the tactical stations. Alert all patrol wings. Stand by for possible engagement loadouts. Around the bridge, the quiet hum of routine shifted into the sharper pulse of action. Status boards lit up with readiness checks. Weapon crews across the station began calibrating railguns and missile pods. Flight bays cycled power to interceptors and gunships. Nolan leaned toward Carter. Keep that channel open. If they send anything else, I want it on my desk before the last syllable finishes. Aye, sir. Capri spoke up from sensors again. Sir, there's still no sign of anyone else inbound. Whoever was supposed to guard them, either they're late or they're not coming at all. The captain didn't answer right away. He stepped closer to the central display, the Luthari coordinates marked in red against the endless black. He thought briefly of the stories, how humans were still considered unpredictable by most of the galaxy, sometimes reckless, sometimes impossibly stubborn. Maybe that was exactly what the Luthari needed now. He turned back to the bridge, eyes sweeping the crew. Set course for those coordinates. All ships on standby to undock. Briggs gave him a long, assessing look, then nodded once and began relaying the order. The edge stirred like a sleeping animal roused for the hunt. Patrol vessels were recalled, their hulls gliding in toward the station's magnetic clamps. Maintenance crews ran at a dead sprint, swapping fuel cells, sealing armor plating, checking for microfractures in the glassy curves of the ship's viewports. In the docking bay, pilots snapped helmets into place, their ships crouched like predators ready to spring. Back on the bridge, Carter's voice cut in again. Captain, the second transmission's signal strength is degrading. They might not be able to reach us again. Then it's a good thing we already heard enough, Nolan replied. He took one last look at the red-marked sector on the star map. We're going to them. The Edge's thrusters began to rumble, vibrations running up through the deck plates. Out beyond the station's perimeter, the dark was waiting, and somewhere in that dark, a convoy full of glass-skinned aliens was praying for a rescue that wasn't supposed to come from humanity. The hangar bays of the Edge were alive with motion, the usual steady hum of a routine patrol shift replaced by the clamor of urgent preparation. Metal rang under hurried footsteps, sparks showered from cutting torches as last-minute armor reinforcement plates were welded into place on small, fast strike ships. The scent of ionized coolant and scorched lubricant clung to the recycled air. On the bridge, Captain Isaac Nolan's voice cut through the noise of overlapping reports on the comnet. All patrol wings, load for maximum engagement, fuel cells topped off, railguns, missile pods, point defense, everything hot and ready, no half measures. A pause came over the channel, just enough to register the unspoken doubt running through parts of the crew. Sir, with respect, this isn't our fight. Those ships aren't ours. They weren't even calling for us. Nolan didn't turn from the tactical projection. The red-lit coordinates of the Luthari fleet hovered in the dark like a wound. His answer was level, without heat, but immovable. If we don't help, they die. Right is right, and we do what's right. That makes it our fight. There was no further argument. Orders rippled outward, and the entire station shifted into the rhythm of combat readiness. Down in the hangars, crews moved with the economy of people who'd done this too many times before. Ammunition handlers passed heavy crates of smart munitions hand over hand into waiting weapons bays. Targeting technicians climbed up the fuselages of patrol ships to manually check gimbal servos on nose-mounted cannons. Shield specialists installed fresh capacitors, the units locking in place with a hiss and a dull click. Overhead gantries slid into position, suspending missile racks above ships so they could be bolted into reinforced wing mounts. The pilots were already sealing themselves into their cockpits, helmets locking into place with a metallic clasp. Flight systems came alive one by one, control panels lighting up with diagnostics. The low growl of engines spooling rose in the background like the clearing of a giant's throat. Near the forward launch bay, Captain Billy Farmer, tall, broad-shouldered, a scar pulling slightly at one corner of his mouth, was half-turned in his open cockpit, checking weapon status readouts when Nolan crossed the deck toward him. Farmer glanced up over the rim of his helmet with a grin that was more habit than humor. "Farmer," Nolan called over the thrum of engine tests. "Sir? Be ready. The intel package will be on your board before launch. Everything we've pulled from their last 2 transmissions will be in there. Coordinates, probable engagement profiles. You'll have the same picture I do." Farmer's grin deepened, though his eyes stayed hard. "Wouldn't have it any other way." Nolan gave a sharp nod and climbed the short stair back to the command platform that overlooked the hangar. The deck beneath his boots vibrated with the power flowing into the ships below. He keyed into the comm line to the bridge. "Communications. Open me a channel on the same Luthari frequency we intercepted earlier." "Aye, sir. Channel is open," Carter's voice came back. Nolan leaned toward the mic. "This is Captain Nolan, from the space station The Edge. We received your message. Hold on, we're on our way." For a long moment, only static answered. Then a voice came through, high, resonant, each syllable shaped by an alien anatomy into something the translator struggled to keep up with. "Who are you?" The translator's overlay rendered the question in flat English, but the edge in the tone carried through, suspicion wrapped tight around the fragile thread of hope. "Humans," Nolan said simply. On the line there was a faint break in the alien's breathing, a sound the translator ignored, but the human ear caught. Recognition, perhaps, of a word that had lived only in rumor and half-believed reports. Then the voice came again, clipped but steadier. We'll try." Nolan didn't smile, but the faintest shift in his expression was enough for those watching to know his decision had landed exactly as he wanted. He cut the channel and turned back toward the tactical feed. Lieutenant Capri, tablet in hand, stepped up beside him. Her dark hair was tied back tight, her eyes scanning the readiness list as she spoke. "All ships reporting ready for departure. Flight paths uploaded. First wave clears the station in 2 minutes, 40 seconds. Nolan's gaze tracked the flashing green icons as they marked ships moving into launch positions. "Let's not waste a second." In the hangar bays, the launch doors began to cycle open, revealing the cold glitter of the void beyond. The vacuum flooded in, and the steady artificial gravity of the bay eased into the weightless drift of pre-launch. One by one, clamps released with deep metallic thuds. The first patrol ship slid forward, nose tipping toward the black, followed by the next and the next, dozens of them peeling away from the edge in tight formation. Running lights blinked in sequence, casting sharp points of white and red against the darkness. From the station's observation gallery, the departing fleet looked like a spear point cutting into the abyss, headed for a battle they were never invited to, but refused to ignore. Engines flared, blue-white arcs slicing into the night. The commnet filled with the clipped, coded language of ships leaving port and entering the unknown. And at the heart of it all, Nolan stood over the tactical display, eyes locked on the pulsing red mark that was the Luthari convoy, already setting his mind to what would come when they reached it. The human fleet tore through the black, a spear of steel and drive trails aimed directly at the coordinates the Luthari had sent. The edge was now only a shrinking shadow behind them. Ahead, every kilometer they crossed brought them closer to the fight. Inside each cockpit, HUDs glowed with tactical overlays, friendly positions, and a pulsing red icon where the Luthari convoy was struggling to survive. From his command ship, Nolan surveyed the spread of vessels under his control, 2 full strike wings of patrol craft, 6 corvettes armed for ship-to-ship duels, and a handful of heavier gunboats fitted with long-range missile arrays. Their matte black and gray hulls were designed to vanish in deep space, but their engines flared bright as they pushed to maximum burn. The formation was tight, disciplined, every ship holding position despite the strain of their velocity. The commnet crackled to life with the familiar voice of Captain Billy Farmer, his tone a mix of readiness and dry humor. "You know, last time you dragged me off a warm bunk for an unscheduled run, we ended up tangling with a Garovian cruiser that had twice our guns." Nolan kept his eyes on the nav data. "Yeah, but we walked away." "Barely," Farmer shot back. "So tell me, Is this going to be another one of those days? Worse, Nolan replied without looking up. They're hitting civilians. We're going to make sure they stop. Farmer grunted, the kind of non-committal sound that said he didn't like the odds but trusted Nolan's judgment. The private channel pinged. Nolan switched over, and the display at his side resolved into the hazy figure of Fleetmaster Voran. The Luthari commander's elongated head was crowned with translucent ridges, shimmering faintly under the flicker of the signal. His glass-like skin refracted dim pulses of light with every movement, and the tension in his posture was as visible as the hairline stress cracks spidering from his temples. "This is Captain Nolan," Nolan began. "We're en route. Give me your exact position and the attacker's formation patterns." Voran's voice had a resonant timbre, layered with faint harmonics. "We are holding near the asteroid field in Grid Delta 7. The civilians are clustered together, but our shields weaken with every pass. The attackers come from 3 vectors. They are fast and merciless." Nolan motioned to his tactical officer. The data streamed in, and the combat map updated. Red markers fanned in toward a cluster of blue civilian icons. The enemy formations were tight, predatory, with pincer movements closing off escape routes. "Send me schematics for your remaining escorts," Nolan said. "I need to know who can maneuver and who needs a wall between them and the enemy." A faint flicker passed over the Luthari's expression, something between disbelief and gratitude. The channel cut, replaced by the expanding tactical overlay now feeding Nolan's systems. The countdown to arrival ticked down on every console. Crews tightened harnesses. Weapon safeties were disengaged. The low, steady hum of the jump drives swelled toward its peak. "Jump in 3, 2, 1. Reality bent. The stars smeared into streaks, colors impossible to name bleeding across the viewport, and then the fleet slammed back into normal space, right into the storm. The Luthari convoy dominated the starfield to port, massive crescent-shaped civilian vessels drifting in a loose cluster, their pale hulls scarred by plasma burns and kinetic impacts. Smaller curved escorts flitted desperately around them, their movements increasingly erratic as they tried to intercept incoming fire. And all around, the enemy. Their ships were black, jagged wedges, each with uneven hull plating like fractured glass set into metal. Engines burned with a sickly green glow, leaving ragged contrails in the void. They moved in swarms, breaking off and reforming around targets, slicing through space with predatory precision. The moment the human fleet tore in, the rhythm of the fight changed. Enemy ships at the fringes wavered, their formation rippling as crews registered the newcomers. On the Luthari comnet, the translator caught a dozen overlapping voices, shock, disbelief, and something like hope all tangled together. They came. The humans came. Nolan didn't waste time. "All wings, strike pattern Omega. Farmer, take your group wide to port. Drive them off the convoy's flank." Acknowledgements came back sharp and fast. The human ship split into converging vectors, the smaller patrol craft darting into gaps, while the heavier gunboats locked in behind them, missile bays opening. The first human salvo smashed into the nearest enemy wing, targeted at unshielded engine housings and sensor clusters. Explosions flared, silent in the void, but blinding on the tactical feed. The enemy comm chatter spiked. Though the words were unintelligible, the pitch and speed carried their own message, confusion and irritation. Their neat kill corridors had shattered in the seconds since the humans arrived. Farmer's voice cut through the battle noise. "They didn't think we'd be here." "Good," Nolan replied, eyes narrowing on the shifting combat map. "Make them regret it." Luthari escorts, reinvigorated by the sudden presence of allies, surged forward to press the attackers, coordinating fire with human patrol craft. The civilians edged backward toward the cover of an asteroid cluster, shields flickering but holding. The jagged enemy vessels peeled away from their initial targets, now forced into a reactive stance. The humans' sudden aggressive arrival had turned the hunt on its head. From Nolan's command seat, the entire tactical layout was shifting, enemy icons scattering, allied positions tightening. The psychological blow had landed just as he'd intended. The enemy had been ready to crush the Luthari without resistance. Now they were facing humans, unpredictable, uninvited, and absolutely unwilling to give up a single life without a fight. Nolan leaned forward, voice low but certain. "We hold this line. Push them back hard, and don't give them a single breath to think." The human fleet dove deeper into the fray, the black between the stars flashing with the light of a battle that had just turned. Nolan's ship cut a hard vector across the convoy's bow, engines flaring as he drove his formation between the nearest cluster of enemy craft and a battered Luthari transport. The alien vessel's crescent hull shimmered with failing shield light, pale arcs of energy flickering where enemy plasma bolts had chewed into its flanks. "All ships, form on me! Fast rotation pattern!" Nolan barked into the comm. The human patrol craft answered instantly, peeling into tight rolls around his command ship, leapfrogging each other in attack and break sequences that forced the enemy to scatter. Railgun bursts from the lead corvettes stitched glowing lines across the void, hammering the jagged black shapes of the attackers. On the tactical display, the enemy presence still dwarfed their own. For every hostile icon that winked out, 2 more moved in to fill the space. The attackers fought like a pack, relentless, coordinated, and willing to throw themselves headlong into counterfire if it meant closing the kill range on the Luthari civilians. "Target only the ships pressing the convoy," Nolan ordered. "They want blood? They'll have to go through us." A heavy thud reverberated through the hull, followed by the distant shriek of metal under stress. Capri's voice cut through from sensors. "Direct hit, port side, armor plate holding, but secondary heat signatures climbing. Reroute coolant flow from auxiliary systems," Nolan said. "We keep firing." Ahead, one of the enemy raiders, its hull jagged and lopsided like a splinter of obsidian, angled toward a slow-moving civilian barge. Nolan pushed his throttle, crossing its path and letting loose a volley from his ship's forward cannons. The rounds smashed through its plating, sending it spinning end over end before it exploded in a silent bloom of debris. "Nice shot," Farmer's voice came from the port flank. "But they're still coming in waves." "I see it," Nolan replied. He switched to the open frequency, keying in the band they'd intercepted earlier. "Unknown fleet, you are attacking non-combatant vessels. Disengage immediately. You're targeting civilians." His voice carried the clipped authority of a man who wasn't asking. No reply came, only the continued swarm of movement on the scope, the enemy weaving around his ships to try to close with the Luthari again. A Luthari escort surged past on Nolan's starboard, its curved prow venting a steady stream of vapor where a cannon strike had gutted a coolant line. The alien vessel's turrets blazed, driving back a smaller raider just long enough to limp back toward the convoy core. Nolan tried again. "This is Captain Isaac Nolan of the human station The Edge. We are defending civilian lives here. Stop your attack." Only weapons fire answered. Ahead, another black-edged craft broke through, latching onto the shields of a fleeing transport and pouring fire into its midsection. The human interceptors chasing it were forced into evasive spirals as 2 more enemy ships pounced from the flank. Frustration tightened in Nolan's chest. He could see even now that their foes weren't hunting for resources or negotiating position. They were trying to erase every civilian ship from the sector. He switched his transmission to a direct hail aimed at the largest of the attackers, a sharp, blade-shaped vessel that seemed to coordinate the others' movements. "You have no reason to be here. What do you want?" For a long moment, static filled the line. Then a voice came through, harsh, guttural, layered in tones his ear couldn't track. It was less speech than a growl, words grinding like stone. The bridge fell silent, save for the alert tones and the low rumble of the engines. Capri was already feeding the audio into the translator. 30 seconds ticked by in tense quiet before the software rendered it into a flat, chilling reply. "Let them die." The words hit the bridge harder than any weapon's impact. Nolan's jaw set, his hands curled into fists, the leather of the armrests creaking under his grip. There was no more doubt about what kind of enemy they faced. "Then we don't give them that," he said, voice low but carrying to every ear on the channel. The fleet shifted again, human craft weaving between Luthari hulls, their attack runs now even more focused. Nolan's ship dived through a hail of incoming fire to intercept another enemy rush, its railguns carving a path through the swarm. Farmer's gunship dropped in alongside him, missiles streaking past to break apart a pair of attackers closing on a damaged transport. The enemy numbers still pressed hard, but the humans answered with unpredictable maneuvers, ships spinning out of attack vectors only to slingshot back in from an unexpected angle, corvettes switching targets mid-run to blindside pursuers. Every second they held the line was another second the civilians stayed alive. Nolan knew they couldn't keep it up forever, but until the last civilian ship was safe, surrender wasn't an option. The blast from a detonating enemy corvette washed Nolan's viewport in a flare of white light. Fragments of blackened alloy spun out across the void, tumbling end over end. He snapped the controls to the side, rolling clear of the debris just as a warning tone screamed through the cockpit. 2 Luthari civilian ships, their hulls pale and crescent-shaped, took direct hits from incoming plasma fire. Their shields collapsed in shimmering cascades, leaving raw metal to split and vent atmosphere into space. Emergency beacons blinked angrily across the tactical overlay. Captain, 2 more civilian hulls are down to bare structure. Another concentrated pass and they'll break apart. Nolan's reply was immediate. Then we don't let that pass happen. He kicked the throttle forward, pulling his ship into a sharp climb to clear a cluster of spinning wreckage before diving down toward the densest knot of enemy contacts. The formation of hostile ships was a shifting cloud of jagged silhouettes, their angular plating scattering sensor returns, engines burning that sickly green glow. They pressed hard against the Luthari's position, cutting in from multiple vectors, always trying to force a breach in the human screen. Across the sector, human ships were starting to show the strain. Shields that had been a steady glow minutes ago were now flickering or collapsed entirely. Heat warnings flashed on weapon systems. Ammunition counters ticked down with every salvo. But retreat wasn't an option, and Nolan's fleet fought with the kind of stubborn ingenuity that had made humans an unpredictable element in every war they'd joined. Corvettes swapped roles mid-run, flipping lead and tail positions to lure enemy interceptors into narrow crossfire arcs. Smaller patrol craft played dead for precious seconds, drifting in apparent power loss before reactivating drives and surging into the flanks of overconfident attackers. Farmer's gunship looped and twisted in impossible spirals around a heavier enemy destroyer, soaking its fire until a wing of 3 patrol craft could close in from behind and rip its engines apart. Even under fire, coordination was tight. Human pilots trusted each other to improvise, filling the gaps when plans shifted in the middle of an engagement. It was part instinct, part sheer refusal to die quietly. An alarm pulsed in Nolan's ear. A secure channel request. He flipped it open, and Admiral Ordonez's voice came through, low and controlled, but with the edge of a man watching the battle unfold from a command feed. "You have full clearance to engage as you see fit, Captain. We couldn't stand by and watch this happen." Through the noise of the fight, Nolan allowed himself the smallest grin. "Already knew that would be your answer, Admiral." There was a brief pause before the message of Ordonez continued. "The Kratos is inbound. She'll be there any moment. Captain Judge will be accompanying the mission. Expect him." The line cut. Nolan didn't need more. The Kratos was a warship built for breaking sieges, and Judge was a man who didn't do subtle. Reinforcements were close, and that meant they had to hold just a little longer, long enough to show that humans didn't break before the enemy did. He switched back to the open combat net, just as Farmer's gunship swung into his peripheral view, railguns flashing as it punched clean through an enemy corvette's main hull. The kill erupted in a flare of burning debris that scattered past Nolan's bow. "Kratos is on her way," Nolan called out, lining up a strafing run on an enemy wing pushing toward the convoy's southern flank. "And Judge is with her." Farmer's voice came back between bursts of weapons fire. "I'm guessing that means you think we're in trouble?" Nolan cut hard to avoid a plasma lance that seared past close enough to rattle the hull. "I'd say that's putting it politely." Farmer laughed, a dry sound under the static. "Wouldn't be the first time." Nolan targeted a jagged raider locked onto a damaged Luthari barge. His forward cannons thundered, tearing into the attacker's shields before gutting the ship in a single blistering pass. "It'll be good to see Judge again. Been a while." "Yeah," Farmer said, sending a missile spiraling into the engines of another ship diving toward the convoy. "Let's make sure we're still here when he arrives." They broke formation as another squadron of enemy interceptors dropped into the fight from above. Farmer's gunship went low, hugging the arc of a civilian transport and baiting the interceptors into a tight pursuit. Nolan climbed high, cutting across their approach vector and hammering two out of the fight in quick succession. Farmer's voice returned, this time with a note of satisfaction. "Still got that nasty aim of yours." "Just keeping them honest," Nolan said, swinging back down toward the convoy. The fight had devolved into a swirling, brutal melee. There were no fixed lines anymore, just clusters of ships locked in constant motion, attack runs breaking into dogfights, retreat paths turning into ambushes. Human and Luthari vessels moved like pieces on a board that was being redrawn every second. The enemy still had numbers and weight, but the humans answered with audacity. In one sector, a pair of human corvettes feigned a breach in their line, drawing 3 enemy ships forward before cutting behind them and forcing them toward the firing arcs of Luthari escorts. In another, a single patrol craft made a head-on charge into a destroyer's path, firing every missile it had in a single suicidal burst that gutted the larger vessel before it could fire on the convoy. Damage reports streamed in, hull breaches sealed, power relays rerouted, weapons offline, then back online as crews worked under fire. The fleet was bleeding, but every minute they held meant another minute the civilians were still alive. Nolan knew they were burning through the last of their reserves. Shield capacitors were nearly exhausted, railgun barrels were running hot enough to warp, and missile racks were almost empty. But the Kratos was close. They just had to make sure there was still a fight for her to join. "Farmer," Nolan called over the net, cutting down another raider as it tried to slip past. "We're almost at the wall. Hold them." Farmer's answer came through with the sound of cannon fire in the background. "Always do." The humans pressed on, battered but unbroken, locking the enemy in place for one more stretch of defiance until the promised reinforcements arrived to turn the tide. A bloom of fire rolled along the spine of the largest Luthari civilian ship, heat flaring bright in Nolan's viewport before the flames guttered out into the cold. The vessel's crescent frame was split nearly in half, its core readouts screaming critical failure warnings across his tactical display. Every second it held together was a miracle. If the core went, the blast radius would tear through the center of the convoy, taking half of the remaining civilians with it. "All ships, block formation around that transport." Nolan's voice hit the comms with the edge of command that brooked no hesitation. "Layer your shields. Nothing gets through." Patrol craft, corvettes, and gunships moved as one, sliding into a tight screen around the wounded Luthari vessel. Energy barriers overlapped in a glowing web, but the enemy saw their intent and lunged to break it. From 3 sides, jagged raiders rushed in, their black, shard-like hulls cutting through the void. Plasma fire streaked green across the defensive ring, pounding human shields. Impacts shuddered through Nolan's own ship, consoles rattling loose in their mounts. A side panel blew in a spray of sparks, the smell of scorched circuitry flooding the bridge. "Shields down to 45%! Capri called from sensors, her tone clipped but steady. Farmer's voice came over the comms, half buried in static and weapons fire. "Sir, I'm not seeing a way out of this." Nolan scanned the tactical board. The icon for a corvette on their port side blinked out, gone in a single burst of enemy fire. Another ship, the Dagger, was venting atmosphere and tumbling, its transponder ping growing weaker with every second. His own forward shields were collapsing in sectors, bleed-through damage gnawing at the armor beneath. He opened his mouth to give the only order left, when the void split open. The distortion of a hyperspace rupture rippled across every viewport, light spilling in a halo before the UES Kratos tore through the breach. She was a fortress draped in blackened gunmetal, 3 times the size of Nolan's largest escort. Her flanks bristled with turret arrays, railgun batteries, and vertical missile launchers, all active, all tracking. Her forward hull bore the faint scars of old engagements, proof she had been built to take punishment as well as deliver it. And she wasn't alone. 20 more warships fell in behind her, fanning out into a perfect wedge, drives burning bright. Destroyers slid into wing positions, heavy frigates took the vanguard, and smaller, knife-fast assault ships began darting ahead of the formation. For a heartbeat, even the enemy seemed to pause. Nolan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, leaning back slightly in his seat. Farmer. Remind me to send Ordonez a thank you bottle, if we live long enough to deliver it. Farmer gave a strained laugh through the comm. Make it 2, if we get out of this. The pause ended in fire. The Kratos' spinal railguns ignited, their slugs burning white-hot as they ripped across the battle space. Each impact tore clean through an enemy cruiser, leaving it tumbling in pieces. Her dorsal missile bays belched a coordinated volley that split mid-flight into clouds of smaller guided munitions, each one diving into a separate target. The detonations turned the dark into a strobing field of destruction. The Kratos' escorts joined the onslaught. Twin destroyers pinned enemy wings in crossing arcs of laser fire, while frigates surged forward to engage strike craft before they could get near the civilians. The wedge formation didn't just attack. It carved the enemy fleet into fragments, severing their lines of retreat and cutting their formation apart. In the middle of it all, Nolan's battered fleet suddenly had breathing room. The concentrated fire that had been threatening to break their line was now splintered across too many new targets. His own shields began to stabilize as the incoming fire thinned. A new voice crackled into Nolan's headset, warm with familiarity despite the chaos. Captain Nolan, hope we didn't keep you waiting. Nolan's eyes found the comm identifier and he smiled. Right on time, my friend. Farmer patched in, still firing as he spoke. Judge, you missed the fun part. Captain Judge's deep laugh rumbled through the channel. Then I guess we'll just have to finish it in style. And the finishing began. The Kratos drove directly into the heart of the enemy swarm, her forward batteries unleashing continuous fire that shattered ship after ship. Smaller human craft used her bulk as mobile cover, darting out from her flanks to hammer at vulnerable raiders before vanishing back behind her shield wall. Nolan fell in beside the assault ships, his vessel's forward cannons roaring. A raider turned toward him, weapons flaring, but a salvo from the Kratos' port batteries blew it apart before it could fire. Another group of enemy interceptors tried to break toward the convoy's far edge, only to be intercepted by a trio of Judge's frigates that cut them down in seconds. Enemy discipline broke first, then their formation. Ships began pulling away from the fight, drives flaring hard as they tried to escape the tightening noose. The Kratos didn't give them the chance. Her missile racks lit up again, spearing retreating vessels before they could vanish into the void. On Nolan's tactical display, red icons winked out in rapid succession. What had been a swarm now looked like scattered debris fields and isolated stragglers. The space around the convoy opened wider with every passing minute, until at last there were no more enemy signatures, only the drifting wreckage of those who had refused to disengage. For the first time since the battle began, Nolan could hear the change in the comms net. No frantic target calls, no shouted damage reports. Just the lower, steadier voices of crews catching their breath, counting their ships, and realizing they were still alive. The convoy was intact, scarred, battered, but intact. And for now, the humans and Luthari had space enough to breathe. The last hostile blip on Nolan's tactical screen vanished in a flare of static, but the brief moment of clarity was gone before it could settle. New red contacts flared to life along the periphery of the display, dozens, maybe more, appearing in precise intervals. Their movement was not random. Every vector angled inward toward the human fleet. On the Kratos, Judge's deep voice rumbled through the shared channel. Sensors confirm. They're breaking off all pursuit of the civilians. Capri's voice came from the sensor station on Nolan's bridge, clipped and urgent. Captain, all enemy formations have reversed course. They're moving in perfect sync, and they're heading directly for us. The convoy comnet lit up. Through the static, the voice of Fleetmaster Voran came across, stripped of the calm authority it had carried earlier. They are coming for you? His voice trembled, the words catching between bursts of interference. Farmer's voice broke in over Nolan's headset, rough from smoke and strain. Well, looks like we just got promoted to primary target. Nolan pulled the yoke forward, banking the ship into a climbing turn toward the converging enemy wave. Guess we're doing something right. From the Kratos, Judge gave a short, humorless laugh. Or it means we're about to die gloriously. The space between the fleets erupted. Lances of green plasma and streaking rail slugs carved through the void, crossing in a lethal web. Human shields flared bright with each impact, some shattering entirely under the combined assault. The bridge alarm screamed in Nolan's ears, the sound merging with the sharp tang of ozone as an overhead conduit burst, showering the deck with sparks. Shields failing on the Harbinger! Ventral plating breach on the Galveston! Multiple hull breaches on the Drake! We've lost the Percival! No survivors! God damn it! Nolan's shout cut through the comm noise as his hands tightened on the controls. The enemy's focus was absolute. Heavy fire slammed into the Kratos and Nolan's flagship, the two command ships bearing the brunt of the incoming storm. The deck shuddered beneath Nolan's boots with every strike. Panels rattled in their mounts, loose gear clattered across the floor, and one crewman went down hard as a blast threw him from his station. Judge's voice returned, all trace of humor gone. We use the Kratos as the heavy anchor. I'll draw their attention and soak their fire. Your lighter ships stay on the move. Hit their flanks and keep them guessing. Copy that, Nolan replied, scanning the shifting red formations on his display. Farmer's voice cut in, a spark of reckless ingenuity even now. What if I take a two-ship jump right into their center? Put us in their laps and see how they like it. For a moment, there was nothing but the wail of alarms and the faint hum of the failing life support systems. Nolan's face was lit in rapid strobes from the explosions outside, his expression set in unshakable resolve. He opened a private channel. Judge, I've got an idea. You remember the mission in Xantal? Judge didn't pause. Understood. Farmer's voice came in tight, every word laced with tension. You sure about this, Captain? I'm sure, Nolan said, his tone a final verdict. We're not losing anyone else. The order snapped from Nolan's throat before the last echoes of Xantal faded from memory. All ships, execute on my mark. No chatter, no second guesses. The human formation scattered as if the command had blown it apart. Corvettes and patrol craft peeled off in broken spirals, skittering across the battle space like insects startled under a lifted rock. Some dove toward the debris fields, others arced away on jittering vectors that looked like panic. Their engines flared, then dimmed, then flared again, erratic, desperate, unheroic. Across from them, the enemy gathered itself. Jagged black hulls took on a predator's patience. Their lines tightened, confidence returning to the way their ships swung into place. The swarm stopped pursuing civilians and began to herd the appearance of a retreat. They chose a killing ground, a patch of open space bracketed by drifting wreckage and the cold glitter of asteroid shards. Capri's voice cut through on Nolan's bridge, hushed but certain. They're buying it. Good, Nolan said. Let them. The first volleys came in concentrated sheets, aimed not at the scattered patrol craft, but at the monolith that had become the center of the human defense, the Kratos. Enemy cruisers pivoted as one. Pointing like a set of blade tips, they drove a wedge of green plasma and kinetic slugs at Judge's hull. Here it comes, Judge said almost cheerfully. On me. The Kratos did not take the blow. She slid, improbably graceful for a ship her size, dropping 2 ship lengths and yawing starboard, so the storm of incoming fire slashed past her prow and tore an empty lane through space. In that instant, the anchor position, what every enemy gunner had just calibrated on, became an open door. Nolan filled it. His flagship surged forward into the space the Kratos had vacated, engines roaring hot enough to ripple the distortion fields around his hull. He could feel the deck shake as the first impacts slammed into their shields, could hear, even through dampeners, the deep-bellied groan of metal as the frame drank the force. He opened the fleet-wide channel and pushed his voice into the enemy's teeth. "If you want to end us, you'll have to look us in the eyes." The reply was not words, but a wall of light. Fire beat against Nolan's ship in overlapping waves. Plasma lances, rail slugs, shard missiles that detonated into hot shrapnel fields. The alarms on the bridge cascaded one into the next. Red warnings strobed across the overheads. A panel blew, showering sparks. Someone slammed a shoulder into an access hatch to keep it from swinging open. "Forward shields at 28%, Capri reported over the howl of the alarms. "Hull temperature spiking." "Hold the line," Nolan said, steady as if reading out a weather report. "Advance." They drove straight into the enemy's center. The formation opened to swallow them, exactly as planned. Raiders sheared outward on either side of his bow, making room for the kill box. Nolan kept the ship arrowed at the largest enemy cruiser in sight, his guns carving a path through lesser craft that dared to interpose. Behind him, the scatter of human ships that had fled now curved. Not back in, not yet, but into arcs that would converge if the center collapsed. Farmer's gunship cut under a slab-sided destroyer and lofted a pair of missiles up through its belly plates. A patrol pair skimmed the edges of a scrap cloud, flickering their drives as if in panic and throwing off the enemy targeting algorithms by degrees. Dozens of minor moves, none heroic by themselves, all drawing the eye away from the throat of the trap. The enemy obliged. Their line flexed wider to encircle Nolan and crush him against invisible walls of fire. The black wedge ships banked, ventral cannons glowing. The kill box began to close. "Now," Nolan said, and killed the primary thrust for one heartbeat. The ship lurched as inertial compensators fought physics. The enemy guns, already predicting where he'd be, overshot by fractions. In those fractions, the flagship's lateral thrusters screamed, knifing the bow a hairbreadth to port. The heaviest barrage tore past their starboard flank, so close Nolan saw it paint the inside of his canopy in molten white lines. He punched power back to the mains. The flagship surged ahead, punched its cannons through a guardship's spine, and opened a hole the width of a hangar door. "Judge," Nolan said, his voice low, halfway between prayer and dare. "Been waiting," Judge answered. "All batteries, concentrated fire. Box them." The Kratos reappeared like a mountain sliding behind Nolan's back, her broadside swinging into alignment with the gap he'd just ripped. Every turret along her flank lit in sequence, each shot snapping space into lines of fire that crossed, reinforced, and then overlapped into one continuous burn. The enemy's midline, those ships banking inward to close around Nolan, found themselves hammered from stern to bow. Their shields flared, failed, and guttered out. Across the field, human fragments turned on cue. Insects swarmed back, no longer scattered, every ship on a pre-assigned vector. Patrol craft came in low to soar through engine housings. Corvettes dove from above, laying tight strings of guided ordnance into exposed ventral seams. Farmer took the core. A short, savage micro-jump dropped him opposite Nolan, nose to nose with the enemy's command craft. He fired a full spread at point-blank range and pulled hard, the missiles veering past his canopy to hit home in a ripple of white-hot blossoms. "Keep the pressure," Nolan said, and drove into the gap so close to the Kratos he could feel her shield bleed into his. The two ships formed a moving gate. Everything in the center that wasn't human started dying. Enemy discipline unraveled. Their edges folded back on themselves, ships trying to peel away from a killing ground that was suddenly all around them. The line that had opened to devour Nolan now became a wound the humans widened with every breath. Judge's destroyers pinned the flanks, their beams crossing to pound any raider that tried to jump out. The smaller, knife-fast human frigates sprinted into the lanes behind fleeing ships and gutted them before they could spool drives. "Push to collapse," Judge ordered, the calm of a man who knew when a battle had passed the tipping point. "Concentrate fire, center mass, finish it." Nolan's flagship raked one last cruiser stem to stern, then pivoted onto reaction thrusters to present armor to a final desperate barrage from a pair of survivors. The impacts hammered the hull hard enough to throw crew against their restraints. He tasted copper and swallowed it. "Capri? Shields at 9%, she said, breath hitching. "We're still here." "Good," Nolan said. "So are they." The last coordinated enemy burst fizzled into scattered shots, then into nothing at all. The midline fractured. Raiders went dark, drifting. A handful of survivors lit their drives and fled, streaking away as vector lines that grew thin and then vanished into cold. Silence returned in ragged pieces, first as a thinning of the weapons roar, then as the alarms on Nolan's bridge downgraded from screaming to steady chirps. The void settled into the glow of wreckage fields and the distant flickering lights of wounded ships. "Sector clear," Judge said, not triumphant, just certain. "Kratos to fleet. Status checks." The replies told the cost. Hull breaches patched with emergency foam. Crew pulled from buckled corridors. Power rerouted around fried conduits. Names read off in tones that did not tremble, because there would be time later for trembling. Med teams flooded the bays. On Nolan's ship, stretchers slid through smoke-hazed corridors. A young tech with a broken arm kept apologizing to the corpsman for bleeding on the deck, and the corpsman told him to shut up and breathe. Engineers hammered braces into place over a fractured bulkhead while sparks drifted like slow snow. In the hangar, a pilot named Briggs pulled himself out of a cockpit that had half melted around him and tried to stand. Two deckhands caught him before he cracked his head on the plating. Nolan let the bridge lights dim 2 degrees and lowered his voice. "All ships, good work. Hold rescue posture. We're not done until every civilian we came for is stable." A new channel opened. Luthari band, no encryption. The image that flickered onto Nolan's auxiliary screen showed Fleetmaster Voran in close-up. His glass-like skin held hairline fractures that glimmered with faint internal light. The ridges along his skull pulsed with slow gradients of color, an echo of breath patterns in his species. When he tried to speak, his voice broke once, and then steadied into that harmonic cadence the translator flattened into English. "Humans, you have our lives. We'll settle for your people safe and away from this sector," Nolan said, worn but even. "We'll guide your damaged ships until you can jump." Voran's dark-pupiled, oil-sheen eyes searched the screen as if he could see through it to the man behind. "I will have my docking bay prepared for you. Please, come aboard. I would speak with you." Nolan glanced at Judge's identifier on the side channel. Judge gave a single nod. "We'll hold the field." "Copy," Nolan said. "Prep a shuttle." The Luthari flagship loomed like a crescent moon cut from frost glass. Its docking bay opened to accept the human shuttle, pale light spilling out in a soft wash that made the scorched human plating look rough and dark by comparison. Inside, the air carried a faint mineral scent, like rain evaporating from a warm stone. Luthari attendants moved with careful grace, their limbs long and jointed at unfamiliar angles, each motion precise, almost ceremonial. Voran waited in a chamber whose walls held braided veins of bioluminescent light. He was taller than Nolan by a head, all clean lines and translucent planes, the stress cracks along his face catching and refracting the chamber's glow. He inclined his head, a respectful bow that was not submission, but regard. "Captain Nolan," he said, without translator lag this time, his own throat plates shaping the human syllables carefully. "You came when those who owed us duty did not." Nolan took in the room. Panels of alien script pulsing faintly, the distant thrum of damaged systems trying to hold. 2 Luthari aides stood at either side of their fleetmaster, hands folded at their chests. Their eyes watched Nolan with a mix of wonder and confusion. Vorin gestured to a curved bench grown seamlessly from the floor. The Luthari way. Before we jump, I must tell you, our defense fleet was expected near this sector. They were late. And then, nothing. No signal, no relay trail. They never came. The harmonic undertone in his voice dimmed. No one knows why. Nolan nodded once. I'm sorry. The Fleetmaster's black eyes searched his face again. Then, why did you come? Nolan could have dressed it up with strategy, stability, future alliances, goodwill in a bad quadrant. He didn't. Because it was right. Stillness was not absence, but meaning. Vorin held still for a long second, the light in his faceplanes softening. When he spoke, the translator was not needed. Then we will remember the shape of that sentence. He stepped forward and touched 2 long fingers to his own chest, a gesture humans might have called a pledge. We leave now. Our wounded need the quiet of home. But know this, Captain Nolan, if ever your signal finds us, we will come. Nolan inclined his head. Get your people clear. We'll escort you until your last drive spools. They parted with no ceremony beyond the needed. The human shuttle lifted through the pale light and crossed back into the thundered, soot-scarred bays of Nolan's ship. Engines grumbled awake across the human formation. The Kratos swung to pick up the rear guard. Farmer's gunship drifted alongside Nolan's bow like a faithful shadow. On the main display, the Luthari convoy formed into a staggered column, the biggest wounds hidden in the middle. One by one, their drives flared with a clean white burn that looked almost like winter sunlight. Ships vanished in neat blinks. The last to go was Vorin's Crescent, its hull flickering once, as if in farewell, before it slipped into the dark between stars. Nolan let the quiet sit. Then he exhaled and keyed the fleet wide. Form up. Damage control on full rotation. We're heading home. The comm cracked once more. Open channel, wide band, everyone on both sides able to hear. It was Vorin's voice, but larger somehow, as if the words had been allowed to wear a formal shape. What you did today, no one else would have done. If your need ever finds us, we will be there. The transmission ended. Engines brightened along the human line. In the bridge glow, with alarms reduced to a tired murmur and smoke thinned to a gray veil, Nolan glanced at the place where the Luthari had been and said nothing at all. The work was not done. The dead would be counted. The hull would be patched. But the civilians were alive and moving away under their own light, and the humans were still here to watch them go. Hey there, space human. I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind. Or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Also, remember to check the pinned comment. Trust me, it's worth a look. Oh, and one last thing. I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.